Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of NFI Hammer. In this episode we will be painting my very first terrain feature, a ruined Factorium. So this comes in two different issues, issue 31 and 34 of the Imperium magazine. And I've been hanging on to this for a while just for an opportunity where I don't have any models to paint. And now is the perfect time because I'm waiting for the May model of the month. So the first thing, as I've never painted any terrain before, I really didn't know what to expect. I was quite surprised by how heavy and how large the terrain was. For individual miniatures, they're quite small and delicate, with very minuscule parts that are easy to lose and very flimsy, but this felt very solid and had a bit of a heft weight behind it. So I was quite excited because it was quite different to what I was expecting. I kind of imagined it in my head to be kind of flimsy and thin as well. So that was my first kind of surprise. And I was also interested that you still had some assembly required here with the glue and putting on the servo skull in there. Was quite interesting. I did have a bit of a struggle though with the corner pieces on the bigger sections. I couldn't really get it completely flush where the corners didn't have a bit of a gap in it, and if I would fix it on one side then the gap on the inside would get larger, and then if I fixed the gap on the inside then the gap on the outside got larger. So I don't know what I was doing wrong there. If I had some green stuff I could potentially have just plugged the hole, but it was kind of not very noticeable, and because this is obviously a destroyed factory, I didn't think it actually affected the aesthetics of it too much, so I just went along with the gap. But yeah, if anyone's got any tips or advice about how to fix those weird fittings, would be much appreciated. So once it was all assembled, it was time to prime the model, and already it looked pretty cool, just completely untouched. So I did a quick video of it. And so I'm just using my white primer paint here from Bunnings. It only costs about $15, so it's not too expensive, and it's lasted me for the last 5 months that I've been doing the hobby, and I haven't needed to get another one yet. I picked white because the aesthetics that I was going to go for is kind of like a sepia type, dirty factory. I have seen in my Warhammer Brisbane store they've painted it blue, and it looks really cool, but I feel like that's a bit out of my skill levels. So for now I'm just sticking with a very basic aesthetics. And already just with the white spray paint it's kind of creating a cool textured look. My wife always comments that the models look best just after I prime them, which I don't know is a dig at my painting, or just that having the monochrome kind of colours is pretty nice aesthetic to it. I do agree with the Necrons sometimes when they come out all black and shiny that they look pretty awesome just with the one colour. So I picked up 10 more paints because you get buy 10 get one free, and I was kind of picking up one paint every time I went into the city, so I thought it'd be better to buy bulk. So one of the colours I've got here is the Seraphim Sepia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I thought this would have a really cool kind of weathered look. So I've diluted it here 50% water, 50% shade, but it was way too diluted. Even after I finished all of these coats, it hardly changed the colour at all. So this was my first mess up. I think that I should have probably done a thicker coat in the beginning, or maybe I should have used something completely different. Again, if anyone has any suggestions, please let me know. So yeah, I basically had to go over it multiple times, and also this was the first time that I was realizing that terrain is hard for beginners. Like, it's a lot more involved than I thought it was. I thought it would be quite simple and straightforward because you don't have to deal with like faces, which I've messed up before, or hands and feet and weapons. I thought it would be really like A to be straightforward, but I'm realizing that the sheer volume of amount of area to cover is quite, scary. So while the shade was drying, I thought I'd get some Leadbelcher and I'd color in all of these underneath floor component sections. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's all these pipes and fans and sigils that are all, under the surface of these grates. So I thought while the outside walls were drying that I would kind of fill this in with silver just to kind of give it a different colored texture when I do the actual grates later with a darker color. So this was pretty straightforward. So now that the outside's done, I'm doing a dry brush of Rakarth Flesh, and I think this is maybe the biggest mistake that I made, was that, I don't know, maybe there was too much paint on my dry brush, or maybe it was too wet, but where I went over really was quite a strong effect, and so I kind of just focused it on the big panels along the outside, which ended up giving it a different color than the rest of the walls. I think in that way I kind of saved the day a little bit, because it didn't look too bad having it looks like there's two different types of texture or two different types of material, and that's why they're different colored, but it really wasn't the effect that I had planned in my head. I just thought it would be like highlights some of the protruding areas of the model, and it didn't. So yeah, any advice there for how to do dry brushing better would be appreciated. So the next thing is just the Stormvermin Fur on the grates on the roof, and I'm just being careful here, trying not to get any inside the grates so that it covers the silver, and just had to do a couple of coats as well because the bright white of the undercoat was making it show through the thin layer of Stormvermin Fur. So it did take a while, and again I was realizing at this point just how much work I'd signed up for doing all 4 pieces. So I decided to focus all my energy on just this one piece at this point, and was just like, I'm just going to finish this for the video, and then in my spare time, if I get any, I'll try and finish the other 3 pieces. So yeah, any beginner with terrain, just be prepared of the length of time that it takes you. I assume you'll get faster at it as you go on, but yeah, definitely wasn't expecting it. So now we're moving on to the Mephiston Red. So in the magazine that came with the terrain, they showed that all these sorts of big feature artifacts on the model were all painted red. So this is the only red color I had, so Mephiston Red it was. And I'm just being really careful here to not hit any on the actual wall, because I don't have any paint that's exactly that color. I don't really want to have to paint it white and then put layers of sepia wash over it and to try and get it back to normal. So I was really trying to be delicate and avoid hitting any of the edges that I didn't want painted. So that slowed me down even further. And also one thing that I didn't realize when I was doing terrain was that when you have something jutting out of the wall, you have to paint it on all sides. And I mean, you probably don't have to, you could probably just paint the front, but because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I was trying to paint all the rims. So there's like little protruding areas that come out, and you want to kind of paint those so that when you're looking at it from different angles, like the section is the same color. And it just, yeah, it's a very time-consuming process. And then there's all these like divots in all of the sections where like, I guess the bolts and screws would go. And so you got to paint inside those. So yeah, it's heaps of detail, so much more than I had expected. You know, if you'd asked me before I started, I would have just said, you know, it's 4 walls and a roof, like that's 5 surfaces. It's going to take no time at all, but in reality, there's so many different surfaces and edges and textures and colors to paint. So, but it's kind of relaxing at this point, because now once I've done the outside, I can just go in and color in the inside with Mephiston Red. So this part was kind of enjoyable and less stressful. But yeah, just the sheer volume of paint, you know, painting like one section of this, you could paint like 2 or 3 models with the same amount of paint. I also decided to paint the light fixture with Mephiston Red, and now I'm just using Leadbelcher, and I'm going through all of the details on the front, and there's, you know, all these pipe works and tubing, the background of the skull, just anything metallic. I just kind of just put a quick coat of Leadbelcher over. So now it's time for the sigil. So the sigil is half black, half white, and then the skull is the inverse color, so half white, half black. And again, you know, there's these risen beveled edges, and you're going to try and paint the top of those bevels without getting any paint onto the walls. And I just was finding this really kind of difficult. You know, I think in models usually any protruding areas are standalone. You know, they kind of, there's nothing backing behind it, so you can kind of just get your paintbrush and just, they're actually the easy sections to paint. But because here everything's on a wall, you've really got to just be careful. So this was kind of, I just did it by freehand. I was originally thinking of putting some blue tack or some tape or something to try and make sure I don't get any paint on the other half of the skull. But I ended up kind of just being very careful and not really going too crazy. I'm using a lot smaller brush than I normally do, and with the smaller brush I've noticed that you have to keep topping up for paint constantly, which is a little bit frustrating, but it was the only thing that was kind of giving me any control over where I was getting paint. This is kind of one of the cooler details, I think, of the model, and that I thought was really interesting was the sigil. And, you know, I think it really gives it a little bit of character, you know, and in the Warhammer universe, like, these are sort of sentient humans that are like hooked up to machines, and like their consciousness would still remain in this building even though it's been destroyed and abandoned. Kind of reminds me of a Black Mirror episode where consciousness gets trapped in machines, so I thought it was really interesting. And then we move on to the Administratum Grey. So here are some sort of corrugated pipes, and so anything that's sort of corrugated or, you know, ribbed or whatever, I was trying to paint them this kind of color. This was one of the new colors I got, and in my mind, you know, it's sort of a plasticky texture, so this grey color kind of works well for that. And I find like that's kind of my approach for painting things, is I kind of have my own mental map in my head of like this texture or this material would be painted this particular color. So here I'm painting sort of broken glass or any sort of screen or glass. I'm using this metallic blue-green paint, and then I'm consistent in the model wherever there would be like some sort of glass, I'd use the same color. And I feel like it just helps me painting it to not have to make every decision unique, you know, and have to figure everything out. Once I've established a certain pattern, it's easy to follow. But I think it also creates like the object to be consistent. So apologies here, my camera decided to focus on like the wrong part of the model, so it's a little bit blurry. But I really do like this color. I've been using it a bit on the Necrons where they have sort of other energy weapons other than the green, you know, Gauss weapons. So I thought using blue for sort of a screen would be pretty interesting. This is my next big failure in my terrain painting, was I was using Rakarth Flesh, and I was going to go over the skulls to make them a different colour from the background, and my cat came and charged the camera there. But the problem with that is that when I painted the skulls, they didn't really look any different, and if anything they looked worse. So I tried it again with this little skull up here, and it really just did not work. So if anyone's got any advice for a skull colour that would stand out, please let me know. And so now I'm using a couple of different colours that I'd gotten to paint these little wires on the inside. You can use any colours you want, so I just went with these 4 colours to kind of keep some variety. So I used Genestealer Purple, Phalanx Yellow, my Mr. Hobby Bright Green, and I used Macragge Blue, even though I know that's very specific to ultramarines, but because there's such a little amount, I didn't think it would be too noticeable or too distracting. And I wanted to kind of pick 4 different colours that were kind of unique, that would stand out. And in my mind of like electrical wires, they seem to be the same kind of bright colours that would be used for that sort of stuff. But I had no idea like how much involved fiddly work was in, you know, each of these. And I'm sure you don't have to. I could have just left them, you know, the white color, or I could have, you know, just used 1 color rather than doing 4. But I thought, you know, it is very devoid of color, this ruined factory. So I thought it did give it a little bit of pop and a little bit of, you know, pizzazz to make it interesting. But it is good practice as well for my brush skills, like being able to control the brush and not get any on the actual, you know, walls. And yeah, getting the right thickness of paint so that I can kind of cover it in one go, but without being too thick that it kind of affects the texture. But yeah, there was a lot of detail that I had no idea. And even sections where, you know, 2 different wires get combined into another wire, or the wires connect into the servo skulls at the top. It's just, and then there's bundles of wires, and, you know, here I'm trying to combine purple and blue together as like different wires being combined, and heaps of different stuff. You could probably spend, you know, days or weeks painting every little section. But, you know, at this point I was kind of getting a little bit exhausted from it, and because I've been committed to doing 1 video a week, I was like needing to get this out sooner rather than later. And then I remembered that I needed to put some more Mephiston Red on the eyeball of the servitor, just to make it look pretty cool. And then there was all the little servitors as well that I was trying to colour in the eyeball. I'm just really nervous at this point that I was going to accidentally put red everywhere that I shouldn't. And then I've got this technical Ardcoat that's meant to kind of give it a gloss finish, but I really don't notice a difference very much. Maybe I'm not applying it correctly, but yeah, if there is an effect, it's very subtle, and it's so subtle that I don't even notice it. But I have the paint, and it only takes a few seconds to apply, so I just do it anyway. One thing though is like the model looked too clean, too fresh for something that's maybe being destroyed for decades. So I got some Agrax Earthshade, and I went through and I just was trying to dirty up the model. So anywhere that there was, you know, sort of segments that the shade could pull in and help create some definition. So any of the ridge sections or corrugated sections, I was just trying to get some shade in there just to kind of dirty it up. Because the last thing I want is for this factory to look like it's brand new and also super old at the same time. It just wouldn't make any sense. I don't know if it made too much difference. Maybe I didn't put enough shade on. but I feel like it did help take some of the sheen and the shininess off some of the sections, and it also helped fix some of my mistakes that I made where a little bit of paint did get onto the surface of the wall. It kind of just muted it by making it a bit darker and didn't stand out as much. So yeah, in here was a good example of where the shade goes in and just kind of helps give it a bit more definition with those plastic pipes. Rather than just looking all one color, it really brings out the edges. So this is a bit of sponge that I got from when I bought my new microphone, and I just thought I'd tear some parts off here and try and create a little sponge brush. So I've never done any sponge technique or anything like that. You know, I've only used a paintbrush, and I used the straw for the blood spatter effects. Check out that video if you haven't seen it. But people in the comments have been telling me to, you know, try using some different mediums and different materials. So here I've got some Fire Dragon Bright color, and I've just put it onto my sponge, and I'm just sponging that onto some of the metal, and this is kind of creating a rust effect. And I'm using the other side of the brush when I accidentally put too much on. I tried to put it in these like little screws, but I ended up getting a lot on the walls, which I didn't like. But in the other sections, like the fan at the bottom or these grills, it just creates a little bit of a different color and a bit of a corrosion effect that I thought looked pretty cool. It was subtle, but I didn't want it to look too overt and like too in your face. So I'm just going over with another coat, just trying to, again, kind of dirty it up, but in a sort of organic way. At this point, Artemis reminded me that this video is far too long and that I've spent too much time on it, so he came over for some attention. So I had to stop painting and play with him for a little bit. I mean, how can you say no to those beautiful eyes? So yeah, that's approaching the end of the video. But I just want to reiterate, you know, that I had bitten off a lot more than I can chew. You can see in the background there's the other pieces that I haven't started yet. So to finish it off, I just got some Rhinox Hide and the sponge, and I was just kind of applying this over some of the areas that to me looked too clean. You know, if there was a section that was all one color, I'd, you know, go and try and add some dirt to it. Again, it's a kind of a subtle effect, but it did age it up. And then definitely this roof looked way too brand new and shiny. So this is the finished product. I think it looks pretty cool. I think I was really proud of it, but it did take a long amount of time to do. And I think next time that I do some terrain, I'll be starting with a more realistic expectations on how long it's going to take, how much details involved in it. But if you've enjoyed watching the video, if you've enjoyed following my journey, or you have any tips that you'd like to share, I'm always open to them. I'm always blown away by how kind and welcoming the community is. So feel free to comment, like, or subscribe down below, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.